Hi everyone, welcome again to this presentation. Today we are going to be discussing online environments as a new way of learning. As you know, we are currently facing an emergency situation where teaching learning has become a new way of learning has become we have been introduced to different ways of teaching and learning, and today we are going to discuss one of them, which is the so-called online environment. My name is Andrea Sanchez, and welcome to today's topic. As an introduction, I would like to discuss first of all what is an online environment. There are two different types of definitions. We have the online environment, but we also have the online learning environment. Of course, we are going to be talking about, we are going to focus on online learning environments because, this is the subject of didactics and teaching. An online learning environment is a collaborative learning where students are allowed to make their contributions and express their concerns. This is really interesting because last week's topic was about the creation of a dialogue. If you remember, a dialogue, a multimedia dialogue, was actually the type of interactions that you have in a school in distance learning. So it's a type of communication and interaction that is between students and teachers. These kind of contributions are made through multimedia tools, and of course, these multimedia tools are supported by technology, and we are going to understand technology as an instrument of mediation. As we were saying, like in the example of dialogue, that the topic that we were checking previously, the dialogue is really important because we don't have to understand dialogue only as a way to communicate, just like face to face, like we are used to. The dialogue is created by communication in any circumstances. It can be, if I'm reading a book, I'm communicating with the book, and the book is communicating with me, for example. If I'm reading an email, I'm communicating with the email, and the email is communicating with me. So we have to understand the dialogue as a way to communicate with so many different resources. And of course, we are going to carry out this mediation, this communication, through the construction of a space. Of course, this space is what we call, for example, platforms or different sites where education and learning and teaching can occur. Now, what are the theoretical foundations for this topic? First of all, I would like to discuss some goals that online learning environments have. These kinds of goals are really important to mention because we have to first understand the importance of them. So, for example, we have and we need to break barriers of space and time to allow an open interaction. So, distance education has introduced us new ways of teaching and learning, as I was saying. But of course, one really hard to do is to break these barriers because sometimes students feel really far from teachers, and teachers feel really far from students. Even when we are having online real-time sessions, sometimes it feels really far. So this is a big challenge. Another one would be creation to create conditions and facilitate that students can work at their own pace. So, as you know, you are currently also living it as students. We, as teachers, have to create we have to create good conditions and facilitate that you guys can work independently, that you decide the time that you work, that you decide when you are going to turn in an assignment, and that you decide if you study or not. It's actually up to you, students. But this is really hard that students understand. So, of course, if teachers don't explain this, students are not going to do that by themselves. They have to be explained. They have to understand the importance of working independently. Now, I'm going to talk about a little bit more about the theoretical foundation according to UNESCO. As you know, UNESCO is an organization that is worldwide important, and they say that online environments, it's a new form of educational technology that offers a complex series of opportunities and tasks to educational institutions around the world. Of course, UNESCO is always very positive about proposals about new ways of teaching and learning, because they basically are really concerned about every single human in the world being able to obtain education. So of course they see this like really positively. They encourage institutions to start online environments, of course. But let's see, we are going to see the reality of this. um, Now, there is a definition that says that online environments, we have to understand it as a set of means of synchronous and asynchronous interaction that, based on a curricular program, carries out the teaching and learning process through a learning management system. A learning management system is, for example, Google Classroom. Okay, that would be an example. Or I don't know, maybe the platform that we use in WAC, which is called Campus Virtual. So Campus Virtual is an example of a learning management system. So this is like a way to understand learning, online learning environments. We are going to continue defining them a little bit later. For example, this definition, which I find really complete and very clear. So let's see. Online learning environments. They are a scenario in which an individual learns through a self-directed process. And I decided to write this in bold because this is really important that you understand it. You are the future teachers, guys. You, one of these days, are going to be in front of a group, in front of students, and you have to be really, really conscious about this. Distance education, online learning environments require students to be conscious about the self-directed process. We have discussed previously the importance of um, arising awareness not only on students but on society about the importance of distance education and about how hard it actually is, all the work that is involved, all the hours, all the spent hours as teachers and students that we are all the time working. But self-directed process is really, really, really important that you understand it. And it's actually not also, I mean, it's not a matter of understanding it, but also it's a matter of believing believing in it. Like, You, as the future teachers, know that your students have to be conscious that they are going to be working alone. Of course, when we say alone, remember that it's not that they are going to look for their materials, they are going to learn by themselves. Of course, when we self-directed, it's because there's someone behind creating, proposing, and planning the teaching, the materials, and the contents. But the student has to be really conscious about this before starting distance education. So, scenario in which an individual learns through a self-directed process using a series of resources, for example, like we use Google Meet, Google Classroom, we use the email, for example, for doubts or questions, but we can use many different tools, like, for example, the ones that I'm using to create these presentations, YouTube for sharing the videos, so etc. etc. You know that we use many different resources, and some of your teachers also are using so many different resources. So I'm going to start with the definition again because I get lost, as you know. So the online learning environment is a scenario in which an individual learns through a self-directed process using a series of resources that support actively, this is really important, cooperatively, progressively, and independently, facilitating the construction of knowledge and the acquisition of personal and professional skills. I think this definition is really complete, is really clear, and I don't know, I couldn't agree more with this definition. I'm really sorry, by the way, because over here I misspelled environment, but it's environment, okay? So sorry, I was in a hurry as always. But let's continue. Let's see. As I was telling you in the beginning of the presentation, there is the online environment. An online environment could be like any site that you know, any site that you check, maybe that you check to obtain certain type of information. But a very different kind of environment is the one that is online learning environment, because this one has a very specific purpose, which is education. Okay, so basically the organization of teaching and learning process with the use of environment or virtual spaces is a pedagogical process. We have to understand that when we create an online learning environment, we are also taking into consideration pedagogical processes. If you remember, pedagogical processes are the processes that are involved with how people learn, how fast they learn, where they learn, etc., etc. So if we take into consideration those aspects, we have to take into consideration those aspects now when we are distance teaching, for example. So these online learning environments aim to develop the capacity to learn from the creation of the specific conditions that favor it, supported by the use of technology. So, of course, we no longer have classrooms like classrooms as we know them, but now we have with the support of technology, we have certain spaces, we created certain spaces that are going to favor our teaching purposes. For example, there are also 6 different elements in an online learning environment. These 6 elements have to be there, guys. If they are not there, probably you are going to fail in something. You as a teacher or probably the students. When I say failing is that, for example, learning is not going to occur. So you have to be very conscious that when you are going to create an online learning environment, you have to take into consideration these 6 different points. So the first one, The first one is infrastructure. When we talk about infrastructure, we talk about so many different things. Like, for example, in the institution where you work, the school where you work, you need to have the support of the infrastructure. That means internet, for example. If this is online, of course, you need internet. You need the computer. You need not only the computer, but you need at least another device, such as cell phone or maybe a tablet or something like that. So you can check the progress of your students. You can continue updating the sites. You can continue updating the online learning environments that you are creating. You also need, and sometimes when we talk about infrastructure we don't consider this, you also need the technological support. So you need an expert that tells you how to work with a certain platform, how to log in, for example, into Google Classroom. You need also an expert that helps you to understand how the platforms work. Or, for example, if you also have problems or issues with the platforms, you need someone that helps you to solve these problems. You also need, and I mean, when I think about this idea, I smile because it's really funny. It's a really nice idea, but I think it's kind of impossible that we teachers have the support of an expert in design, for example. So we need an expert in design to help us create the materials that are necessary for our students and that are necessary for us to transmit knowledge. So, of course, we don't have an expert that is going to help us designing all these materials. Everything that you see in WAC, for example, and I also have to say everything, all the materials, all the teaching, all the learning environments that you see, at least in Mexico, in any type of university that is public, uh, all that is created by teachers. So remember that when we were mentioning that we basically have to be like experts on everything, well, now, today, is really important that teachers also are experts on technology, design, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that's about infrastructure. Now, what about curriculum? If you remember, well, I don't really know or remember if we have discussed curriculum, but one of the ways to understand curriculum basically it's the contents that you are going to teach as a teacher. So all the contents that you have to consider when you are planning an online course, for example, the contents you have to think really carefully because I don't know, maybe there are some people that can assure that distance education and face-to-face education is basically the same, so the contents are not affected. Well, guess what? Of course, they are affected because if this is your first time in distance education as teacher or as a student, you are going to find yourself like almost going crazy because all the time that distance education takes. So of course that would mean that the contents will be affected. Probably as a teacher you are going to teach less contents or probably you are going to teach more contents. It's going to depend on you as a teacher, but also it's going to depend on students. How they are learning, if they are learning, and if they are ready for the next content. Okay, now the third element is planning. You know, guys, you know that planning is essential for teachers. Okay, next semester you are going to have a class dedicated only to planning, and you will see how difficult it is, but at the same time how important it is. So for example, as you can see, I'm going to take my class, my subject as the example, not because I want to say that I do the best planning, but I want you to see like a real example. We started, like for example, us, the subject, we started checking like the generals of distance education. We also started seeing like the current situation in Mexico, the situation like worldwide, how students and teachers are living this, and we also discussed like some very theoretical perspectives like the dialogue that we discussed last week. So as you can see, there is like an order. There is a proposal in which I decided to make to you. I decided to do this for you because I see that this order that I'm proposing is going to take you to obtain more knowledge, but also to understand it like little by little. So the planning, it's something that has to be there, and the teacher is the one responsible for planning. So basically for proposing the order, proposing the contents, proposing the materials. So the planning considers all these aspects in aspects inside the class. The fourth element are the learning resources. So the learning resources are basically the materials. So in this case, that is online, like the creation of videos, the creation of a podcast, like the last time we met, remember you were discussing like podcasts, the creation of documents, presentations, images, anything that is going to help you to transmit knowledge, that is a learning resource. Okay, as you can see, as a teacher, you spend a lot of time creating these resources, but they are really important because it's the way in which you are going to transmit the contents to students. Communication, it's number 5. We have been saying communication is really important. There are some students, like in my Italian classes, one of them, he is 82 years old, and he was telling me the other day, he was sending me messages through WhatsApp, and he was telling me like, I'm really sorry, teacher, I'm really sorry to disturb you, but it's been really hard for me now that we are not working like face to face. For me it's really hard to understand the instructions, it's really hard to find the material, so I'm really sorry, I have to ask you again for the homework, I have to ask again for you to send me the book, or etc., right? So the communication is the key to success in your teaching, and in the case of students, it's the key to success in learning. I'm not talking only about communication between teachers and students, but I'm also talking about the communication that students among themselves they have. It's really important. Not the type of communication like gossiping, for example, which I mean, it's important also because it creates social relations that are really important in the learning process. Because in the end of the day, the school is like a social system, so we are socializing. But students have to communicate among themselves because this way, they can create knowledge. And if they create knowledge, remember, this is going to be more meaningful for them because if they start discussing, for example, a topic, or if they work together in a homework, or if students work together in a project, it's going to be more meaningful. They are going to have a lot of types of communication, and this is going to be learning. Learning can occur more easily. And finally, we also have to take into consideration the learning evaluation. As you know, any teaching process has to have a learning evaluation. So remember that when we say evaluation, people tend to think only about exams, like written exams, but we can have different types of evaluation. We can assign students assignments homeworks, activity, tasks, projects. I don't know, even creating a video. Working together, working in groups, working in pairs, working alone. Like, you have to think of different ways to evaluate their progress. We are not only concerned with exams because for exams it's really easy, you can memorize and that's it. But in the creation of a project, for example, where you actually put into practice everything you learned in a semester, that is the nicest and more complete way to evaluate students. Now, be very careful with this following information. There are some people that are really concerned. Oops, I misspelled here again. Environment. There are some people that say that, okay, I have all my elements. So we were saying, as a teacher, I have my infrastructure ready, I have my contents ready, I made my planning really carefully, I have my learning resources ready, I have great communication with my students and they communicate really good, really well among themselves, and I have my evaluations ready. So I'm perfectly ready. Now I can teach online. I can teach in a distance education. Well, not really, guys. It is not guaranteed by itself alone the improvement of the quality of learning through online learning environments. Even when you have all the elements, when you created really amazing materials, when you have great communication with your students, it doesn't really mean that students are going to learn. I mean, it's like you can have the best book in the world to learn English, the most expensive book, the best book in the world, but if you just don't want to study English, you won't learn English. So it's the same. You need to have your students ready. You have to prepare them to receive distance education. Make them aware of all the effort they have to put into it. Making them aware on the importance of being professional, like not copying, not like copy paste on their tasks or their documents they have to turn in. You have to just like make sure that they know what's going on in the topic, in the subject, in the contents of the class. So it's not a guarantee, guys. You have to work really, really hard when you decide to use online learning environments. Another thing that we have to have in mind, and that it's really important, it's the professional development plans. When I say this, I'm basically talking about the creation of teaching strategies and the correct use of information technologies. So both students and teachers have to know how to use technology. So if your students enrolled into distance learning, and they don't know how to use technology, it's going to be really hard. So guess what? You have another role as a teacher. You have to teach them how to use the tools, the platforms, how to create resources, materials, etc. So it's your responsibility, okay? And also, as a teacher, you have to create teaching strategies that are going to be useful for your students' learning. Another thing that is important is the quality and quantity of communication between teachers and students. We have discussed this previously, just like some minutes ago. So, I mean, not because you are talking all the time, like a lot, it means that you have good communication skills. Make sure that you don't actually are there all the time, like communicating all the time, because they are going to feel like stressed out. They are going to, I don't know, maybe they are going to feel like, you know what, teacher, leave me alone just for a day, for a minute. So make sure that the communication that you have with your students is more of quality. It's more quality than quantity. Okay. And finally, the development of learning strategies process to ensure that students become managers of their training process. So basically, you have to make students aware that they are in charge. They are the boss. They are the man. They are the ones in charge of their learning progress, but also not only progress, but also process. So they are the ones in charge. You are there as a teacher because you guide them, you facilitate the materials, you facilitate the contents, you are there to guide them and to help them to solve maybe some questions. But in the end of the day, in distance education and in online learning environments, they are the ones in charge. So make sure that they have a plan, for example, for their yeah for the objectives of the class or the objectives of this subject. Okay. And finally, teaching system media. This is aimed at promoting the autonomy, developing creativity, solving real world problems, and fostering interest in scientific research. In the end of the day, when we are working online, we need to promote students' autonomy. You already know this. Um, we have to encourage them to develop their creativity. There are some students here in our faculty that are really creative. They are also very artistic, and these two different sides of being artistic and creative are a really nice mix, and they can create amazing projects, amazing proposals. So I just would invite you to support this kind of people, just like help them, guide them to be more creative, and not only like get stuck into using the same kind of, I don't know, platforms, the same kind of presentations, just like make sure that they get more prepared, they are more ready in order to deal with real world problems in the future, as future teachers, for example, in your cases. Conclusions. So, as a summary of what we've discussed, and also as future reflection, remember that I love this part when we talk about a new topic. I love encouraging in you to reflect. It's really important that you reflect because I mean you see the topic, you hear the topic, you read about the topic, but you make it your own when you internalize the topic. And when we say internalize the topic, it means that you reflect on the topic. You see it through your own eyes, you see it through your own experiences, and you are going to understand it a little bit differently because you understand it based on your context. So, the use of online learning environments in higher education institutions in Latin America, this is really important that I say and specify, focuses on the fact that they facilitate the organization of space and distribution of teaching resources, time management, and interactions that occur in the classroom. So basically, in Latin American universities, they are only focusing on organizing the platforms, like providing platforms for teachers and giving them like different resources so they can manage the interactions among teachers, students, and also manage the time in which they are going to teach a certain topic. If you think about it, let me go back. It was just reflecting on this. If you think about it, basically Latin American universities are only answering to the problem of distance education. Like now, in the middle of the pandemic, we have to have this resource like online learning environments, and that's it. Like, for example, universities are providing it, but that's it. They are just giving us the space, they are giving us the resources, and that's it. The teachers have to do the rest of it. And it's a lot of things they have to do, and institutions are actually not like really involved in this. Um, we also have a diagnosis. When we talk about diagnosis, I want you to think, for example, when you are sick and you go to the doctor's office. You go there because you feel something, you feel that something is wrong with you. And you go there with an expert because you want them to tell you what's wrong because you don't know. Okay, so basically the diagnosis, it's basically a diagnosis that the doctor is going to give you. They are going to tell you what's wrong with your body and why you are so sick. So if we think about this kind of term like diagnosis, we have to understand that we also understand we are trying to understand what's going on badly in the online learning environment. So here's a diagnosis about it. Basically, in Latin American institutions like such, in more specifically universities, we are using these three platforms to teach. Remember that, well, this paper that I read to base today's topic, it was written I think in 2013. So that was 7 years ago. So that means that the scenario was really different from today. Okay. So back in 2013, universities in Latin America, they were using these platforms, Moodle, Blackboard, and Sakai. Okay. So basically, universities use suitable sites for the development of teaching and learning processes. They also contemplate the use of task spaces, forums, emails, chats, and links. So these platforms, Moodle, Blackboard, and Sakai, provide you with, like, you assign tasks to students, you have forums to communicate, you have the use of email, you can create chat rooms with your students, and I don't know, the use of different sites, links, etc. Now, what for? What for? What is the purpose of this? Well, we have to complement as a way to complement to the academic and administrative management of the institution. So basically, universities in Latin America have been creating online learning environments as a way to complement the academic and administrative management of the institution. So, for example, just take a look at you in this faculty 6 months ago. No, not 6 months ago, because 6 months ago was the starting of the pandemic. 1 year ago. Try to remember the kind of teaching that you were receiving 1 year ago. I remember, for example, 1 year ago, no, it was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I discovered Google Classroom. I remember that I discovered it because I was just like browsing on the internet and I saw something Google Classroom and I said, wow, what is this? So I decided to look for more information about this. And I discovered that, well, you know Google Classroom, now you know it perfectly. But back then, I remember thinking, well, this can complement my teaching. I can complement my teaching because I don't know, maybe I can use the Google Classroom to upload the materials that we are using. Maybe I can assign certain types of activities and they can upload those activities in that site. So it's a way to manage the activities, the homeworks, and the assignments. And we have a site that is safe, which is really important to take into consideration when you're a teacher. You have a site that is safe, and you have a site that is going to help you manage not only your academic side of the class, but also the administrative. For example, I remember spending too much time writing emails, like writing the email addresses. I remember that before, like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, in my first week of classes when I started a new course, I would ask you to make a list with your full name, your matricula, your expediente, your, yeah, that way, that thing, I don't know in English, and your email address. So I remember that I asked for the email address because that was the way in which we could communicate. We could communicate if I had like a special announcement, or if I had an emergency, or maybe just to send you materials, or the program for the class, I remember. So one way that Google Classroom would help me administratively speaking, there, I said it, would be that, for example, I didn't have to write email addresses anymore. I would simply give you the class code for Google Classroom, and I would obtain automatically a list of your email addresses. So basically, what universities were doing back then in 2013 would have to be only with using online learning environments to complement their academic and administrative management, and that was it. Also, they were using it as a mean for the development of teaching process, but back then in 2013, I mean, it was the beginning of it, especially here in Latin America. Now, what about the benefits in online learning environments? I'm sorry for the spelling, guys. I'm really sorry. Well, they say that with online teaching and distance education, we have a more democratized access to educational offerings. They say that everybody today have an internet access, everyone has internet access, everyone has a computer, and if they don't have a computer, they have a cell phone. So if everyone has access to a cell phone and an internet connection, basically everyone has access to education. As we know, it's not completely true, at least here in Mexico, but taking into consideration that everyone has a device and internet, everyone can access education now. There's also a cost reduction because now that we are not attending the campus, yeah, of course, the costs have decreased. Like, for example, we are not using power, we are not using light, we are not using the projectors. Remember that they would break all the time, projectors, or maybe I remember making a joke the other day because there was a teacher who was saying, "Oh my God, they were trying. We were like in a face-to-face meeting, and they were trying to write something on the board, and they said, 'Who has a marker?'" And I remember just like laughing and saying, "A marker? What is that? We don't use that anymore," for example. So just think about everything that with online education we are not using anymore. Like, for example, maybe books, notebooks, yeah, a bunch of things. Even like Wakibus, remember? We are not paying for that gas. So everything has decreased. Related to costs. And also, it's really important that we consolidate distance education. Now that we are going through this pandemic, it's really important that we take this topic seriously, that we study it more, and that we understand distance education, that we see it through different eyes, and we just like embrace it because it's maybe it's our future, who knows. And also, another benefit will be the improvement of quality of teachers and the promotion of the development of abilities for the use of the real world. Talking about the ICTs, the communication technology. Okay, so yeah, absolutely, this is another big benefit, and we already know it. Okay, so as I was telling you, this I read a paper written in 2013, which is Uso de los entornos virtuales de aprendizaje en la educación a distancia. You can consult it, you can read it if you want more information about this. I would like to thank you for listening to me, listening to my comments, but also I want to thank you um, for your presence, for being here.